Yeah. Yeah, so this is a class about the history of history. Right? Which some people claim is not a good thing for me to do because we already answered this last week, right? Because I'm against history, so why do I do the history of history? We answered this question last week?
No, yes, also against the historiographers. How do they know what they think?
Yeah, we did it the other way around. But it's also a question this way around. Right? But the Chiddush is, so the truth, I was going to say something like this. The truth is that it depends what you mean by history. so it's going to go the same way. You already know how it's going to go. And also depends what is means. No, so the thing is like this. The point of there being a history of history is very important. That's my main contention. Because we, and that includes anyone that went to a school which had a history lessons, even whether they're kosher history lessons or non-kosher history lessons, which is a thing that didn't used to exist. Imagine that. How do I know it didn't used to exist? Because I also went to a school that didn't have history lessons and wouldn't even get like what that means, or probably would get because they don't live on an island really, but there's no history. They don't think that it's part of the curriculum to have a history lesson, right? So we all get brainwashed that there's such a thing as history. At least there's such a thing. Maybe that is the only thing, but at least that there's such a thing. And turns out, and my proof from history, I always use history as a proof for this, that there doesn't necessarily need to be such a thing. How do I know? Because I have this assumption of the people on the past not being entirely crazy, although they were weird. Were also weird, but they were not entirely nuts. And those people didn't hear of the concept of a history lesson. So something is going on. Now this is not, just to be clear, it's possible that they were dumb, like meaning to say that they were wrong, right? It's possible that at some point people discovered the truth that you needed to have history lessons, and that's why we have history lessons. And the fact that there wasn't history lessons before doesn't prove that it's not true. What it does prove, or at least shows, is that it needs justification. If you want to start a history faculty in your school, you need to write a book about it to show why there should be such a thing, right? So the point of having history of things, in my way of doing things, is not because that is the ultimate explanation, or some way things that are earlier are better, which is the Charedia, or whatever you want to call it, way, or the things that are later are better, which is like progressive arc of history way, but that there are more than one way. So if you like flatten the whole history and look at it horizontally, like forget about history. There are people here that don't believe in history, that never heard of the concept. And actually, that's why it helps better to say it instead of they'd ever heard of it, because it wasn't invented yet, they're against it. They actually did hear of it, they just think very little of it. Or they heard of something similar to it. So that's the point of having a history of history, although we're not doing history, right? And that's also why, like we did last week, it would be very easy. And this is amazing because like every kind of theory like this, every discipline wants to be the judge of everything else and never wants to judge itself, right? Or that's one thing, or even most of the time doesn't even want to justify why it gets to be the judge. When Plato said philosophy, or what he called dialectic, as the judge of everything, and therefore the people that know it should be the literal judges or should rule everything, he at least tried to justify why it's the king of the sciences and why he needs to rule everyone, right? But all the other people, well, they do justify it, but they don't tend to do it in the way it's taught nowadays. Originally, they did try to justify it. You need to at least justify, right? When you come to me and argue from history, at least you tell me, okay, why, who made this guy the king, that I should listen to him? Was he elected? Was there a divine right that gave it to him? How did he become the king, Mr. History?
It just seems like such a limited field.
Oh, so actually it's, well, that's what you say. The historians don't think so. They think that they include everything. That's why there's histories of everything. History of this, history of that, which is supposed to be the definitive account of that in some sense. More than the people doing it, that itself, right? Yeah, so that's why we need to know the history. Now, of course, like I'm saying, the first thing is that no discipline wants to judge themselves. So what they want to do is They want to just assume that they're the judge. And what I meant with the worst thing with them not judging themselves is that they don't apply the same analysis to themselves. Right? Now, this is a very silly thing in some way to say, because I hate these kind of like rhetorical arguments, like, and you're your grandmother, who cares? But I mean, in other words, like, when I say, nothing we know is they're certain. So are you certain of that? Well, no, I'm not certain of that because I include that. Thank you very much.
I always thought the best like the definition of like philosophy in some sense is that the philosophy of it's the only thing that the philosophy of it
is still it.
The same subject matter as it itself.
That's what philosophy Mr. Collingwood would like that definition.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Lowy, yeah.
This is also different because they leave you no choice.
Who doesn't live at choice? The
philosophy that you're arguing against, the historians, they leave you no choice. It's like everything else is invalid. So fine, I have to argue your turns and flip out.
But okay, no, beside that, but I don't like. That's one thing to do. But it's interesting because, in other words, would a historian really? There is. I mean, the other book that I recommended is basically a historical history of history, where every kind of historiography is explained by what politics it serves for the most part, or by what kind of place it serves in society, or some kind of historical thing like that. But nobody would say the like radical thing that I mentioned last week, which I read in this other book on the German historiography, which is that at the end of the day, the reason why this discipline exists is because people needed jobs, and they wanted, not only they needed jobs, they were looking to add prestige to the discipline. If I'm a historian and I want to have like a chair of history, I don't want to be like the side chair to someone else, then I need to justify that his claim that history is the king. But that's actually true. In other words, it's true that the strongest, at least we could say the strongest, not the only, but the strongest defenses of history, and like you say, you will say history is limited. The people that say that history is unlimited, it is the king of everything, were actually those people who were in German universities in the 18th century establishing the field of history, and before that, more or less, in the German tradition at least, the English tradition had some histories before that and things like that, but they were actually the ones that established the thing. The reason why, now modern universities are descended from either German universities or English universities, and the reason why, how do you call it? In Israel, for example, the reason why you have history is because in Germany they invented history. In America, it's more like because of England. But so the people would, there's different. Jewish, the reason why I talk about German historiography is because Jewish, as Jewish thought is a German, how do you call it? German phenomenon. The history of Jewish Wissenschaft and the Mad'ei Yahadut, right, the sciences of Judaism, are a German invention and were very explicitly born in the same way as the general German historiography was born. So anytime, and like if you read any modern Jewish thinker, you're basically reading someone writing in the German, like Neo-Kantian tradition usually, but or the other ones, they're still writing within like the context. You have to always remember, this is something actually that people forget. And that's why it's very weird. Like if you think of in the Jewish context, especially weird. Like in your these kind of blogs, right? When you're in yeshiva, you're like, okay, this is the truth, and then you find out that someone else has a better truth, and it turns out to just be a different yeshiva. Meaning to say, like there's a certain set of vertlach that are, mekubal and Lowy yeshivas, that like this is the base, like the rate, right? Where everyone assumes that it's not crazy, at least it makes sense. And there's also a set of vertlach that are accepted in university, and they're just like when you're in yeshiva and you're slightly critical, you understand that there's a lot of it like because of the personality of their yeshiva and because they were all studied by the same Rebbe who gave them a lot of kavod, and therefore they took him seriously, or vice versa. The same exact thing happens definitely in what's called in the humanities, right? They're entirely like this. If the hard sciences are also like this, it's a different discussion. But for sure, like anytime someone comes, well, all academics agree that whoever wrote the Bible or whatever, that's just worth about as much as all yeshiva people agreeing that Migui is something. It's not, which is not a bad thing, right? It's fine. That means that the people that have established this school of thought and they think within a certain system, they arrive at some kind of conclusion, sometimes for a good reason, sometimes because of, for charisma reasons. You know, all the Kabbalah scholars agree. You know, all the Kabbalah scholars were told by one person who was a very hard personality, and you could not fight with him. Not only because he was always right, but he was smart and everything, but he just was a difficult person to deal with. Yeah. Yes. And now I'm not. This is not to knock on him or anything. It's just to notice the fact that like everyone likes to pretend that they're like the invisible, you know, view from nowhere, which has no biases and is just like giving the pure truth. But if you find that there's the same Lashon Hara and the same like, you know, personal problems and kind of issues over there too.
So you know, as they haven't solved. And that's
I don't know that it's a problem to be solved. I just know that it's not necessarily a like objective thing. Although there's like everyone thinks that they're objective, you know, that they have criteria for things and so on. But it's not necessarily it's not like in a weird assumption that both, you know, both sides of the like Jewish arguments always have is like, this is the yeshiva, this is the small world which is self-enclosed and based on runs on all kinds of little things. But that is the big world. It just has, by the way, literally smaller usually. All of academia is about smaller than all of yeshiva world, more or less. At least definitely in these subjects, it's like literally 30 people, the whole thing, whatever. But like how many Kabbalah scholars are there, do you think, that are worth anything? How many were there in the last 100 years? Way less than there were shivas that give shirim on Bava Kama, right? 20, whatever, you could count their names. And their students, if you even count their names, and the people that didn't write famous books, like, okay, so it's another 200 people. It's not a huge amount of people. And the fact that they have certain methodologies and so on, these are valuable things. I'm not saying that they're not valuable. I'm just saying that you should notice that they have a context too. And it's very hard, if your whole shtick is to give put everyone else in their context, you always forget your own context. And in that way, it is true that it's important to remember that the thing for history was invented by people with a certain context, who had a certain stella that they had to defend, and so on.
This is Gretz in the first.
One of the first. Yeah.
It's funny because this book is like explicitly like.
You know, in those days they were very. It's a good book.
It's like, I don't like Polish Jews.
But it's a good
They
book.
deserve to die.
But it's still a good book. And it's very much part of. I don't remember. I don't have in front of me right now the like details of the Jewish historiography situation. But it's literally part of the same movement of historicizing many things, and whatever. I'm not giving a class in the Jewish aspect of this today. That's number one. But really, I really want to move on from this, right? I don't want to just be claiming that these people are just defending their jobs, because I think that that's actually a bad explanation, even for that, right? Because it doesn't even explain. In other words, it's an external explanation. It doesn't even explain why that person would be interested in being professor of history. Okay, now that he's started history, he needs to have his job. So he writes a big fat book explaining the value of history. But why did he do it in the first place? That didn't answer the question. See, it's just pretending that there's some like givens, like, you know, this guy is history, Mr. History, and therefore it's just his ego pushing a thing. But that didn't really answer even the question that we had. It didn't answer, right? That didn't answer the internal question, which is how this person actually justified it to himself, or what were his justifications. And he's just pretending that it's not important because there's a context to that. Well, okay, there's a context to it, but there are actually justifications. And that is actually what I'm interested in. In other words, forget about all the politics. That's just history. I don't care about that. What I do care about is that the fact that historically it needed justification, and there's a reason why it needed justification. We can explain what they're fighting against, like what are the assumptions that are anti-history, and we can explain what are the strategies to solve it, and then we could just study this thing for ourselves. Then we could think, do we agree to this, or do we not agree? That's all.
Does this speak specifically to like people with like a metaphysics of history, or even?
Oh, you missed last week. It doesn't matter if you have a fancy metaphysics of history or you have a stupid metaphysics of history. Both of these people are still putting history before truth. I'm going to give a definition for this today if I could. Right? So you can be like very fancy spirit of the Hegelian or whatever God, which makes it more complicated and so on. But still, you would be interested in history and not in the truth as it is. Yeah, that was the subject mostly of last week's class.
Maybe the only thing that's true about, let's say, set again another, is that it was.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. For you could say for because the only thing that's true is people trying to make money, or you could say because truth is the spirit of the times flying around. However way you say it, you're still saying that. Yes. Okay, so that's why I think it's interesting. Now, my most general story, which you should learn in my homework, is that there's really 3 or 4 different things that they're fighting against. And this is the important thing to notice, so I don't have to list. There's really 3 or 4 different things that they're fighting against. Okay? And you could divide this in periods, but you don't have to. There's no reason to pretend. I mean, it's true that styles change in periods. People get interested in different questions, and that's an interesting thing to ask also. But the questions are still remain. And it goes like this, okay? We're going to skip, and if you read my book that I assigned, you'll see that it goes in this order. But I want to skip the first thing. So the first thing, and if you're in the Jewish context, you say the first thing is what it says in the Torah. We skip the Torah always because this is my position in general. I don't believe that there's anyone that claims to just be reading the Bible and telling you what its theology or philosophy is doing anything worthwhile. What he's doing is just thinking backwards. It's just applying whatever the default assumption of truth is in his time and reading that into a text that's very bare bones and doesn't really say anything, or it doesn't, not in this sense. So therefore, that's not really useful, right? So therefore, we start from people that we understand, and then we could work backwards and think is there a real kasha to this from the Torah or not? But you can't really start with saying, well, this is the biblical view. I don't think that works. But we could start from the Greek view, and I think Chazal view, which is, even Chazal, I'm not sure if we could talk about them. We're so used to darshaning them, so nobody knows what they're actually saying. And even the people that know, again, are doing the same fallacy of just making them matter, which is very dumb. So I don't know. I actually think that, I don't know. I mean, that would be a starcist assumption to think that you could explain them according to, there's more in the fridge if you want. Explain them according to the kind of thoughts that other people had in their time, which is also wrong. So I don't know. In any case, if we go back, and we went all the way back, and anyone that writes about this quotes this, and they all, as we discussed, just assume that this is obviously wrong, so we don't even have to explain why. That's one of the most beautiful things of reading modern histories and modern philosophers. So they know so many things that I don't know. And this is the ancient Greek view. And the ancient Greek, that's not an ancient Greek view, that's dumb. It's the philosophical view, which is against everything, is the truth. And and the philosophers, meaning Plato and Aristotle always, because there's other philosophers that didn't think this way. So this is also very dumb when someone says Greek and they mean one guy that lived in Greece. That's another reason why you shouldn't be a staricist, because starcism always has to pretend that there's no humans, there's only eras and periods. And that's very dumb. So anyways, what?
Didn't Heidegger have an obsession with Heraclitus or something?
Yeah, no, he was, whatever, it's complicated. Okay, yeah, Heraclitus is against this, right? But the Plato-Aristotle position is very explicitly that history is worthless. And the one that says it the most explicitly is Aristotle. We read his Poetics quote, which you should read, which says that explicitly Homer is better than Herodotus. Remember? Because Herodotus tells you what happened, and Homer tells you what should happen or could happen, which is much more interesting. It's still not philosophy, but it's close to philosophy. And more broadly, and this is, Collingwood explains it this way, but it's true. More broadly, this goes back to what a science is, right? Which is another word, and science just means a knowledge, right? What knowledge is. And the ancient philosophical view, which is not only the ancient philosophical view, it's a question if, Chazal or the rabbis think this way, but definitely almost everyone that thinks from Plato until yesterday thinks this way. Until yesterday, meaning until people stop thinking. So it's very young. They all think that the thought, and this is Plato's in the Republic and in many places describes it this way, that thought, which is knowledge, must be stable, must be true. So true is another word for stable, something that doesn't change, right? And therefore, because knowledge is some kind of connection, right? Some kind of relation between the thing known and the knower, right? Knowledge is not a psychological state. That's not what we call knowledge, not philosophically. Knowledge is some kind of, right? Philosophical state and psychological state are just what they are. At least the representation or the connection or the form being informed, however you explain it, but it's some kind of relation between the object known and the person knowing it. That's what knowledge is. And because we could think of different kinds of knowledge, and you remember that the whole idea of Plato getting out of his cave was to move from doxa to episteme, right? To move from opinion to knowledge. To move from how do we call it in a different thing? Well, that's the answer, the object. But it's in thinking, it's assuming everyone knows that you have to move. There's some value, there's some a quality called knowing, which is different than thinking. Thinking on, like I think, like I believe. Nowadays we'd say belief, like in the medieval Rishonim that we believe, they often associate what's called anciently opinion with like emunah pshuta. Well, they didn't have this language, emunah mekubeles, believing on testimony or just believing things. Oh, yeah. No, that's a different pshat. That pshat was a better pshat. That was a Rambam pshat. In any case, everyone has opinions, okay? You've got an opinion section in the newspaper. That's not knowing. It's not even wrong. You see, that's the main thing, right? We did this tradition against opinion sections. It's not even wrong. It's not wrong because knowing should be a kind of thing which stays the way it is. Otherwise, what do you know? You know today one thing and tomorrow it changed. So where's the knowledge? Well, is this bad? Is this wrong? In other words, is it not true that yesterday was like this and today it's like this? Yes, it's true. In the sense of like being, what do you mean by true? It's true in the sense of like the facts of the story being such that today it was like this and tomorrow it was like that. But it's not truth in the sense that there could be some kind of stable relationship between two things. And that's why, or that's at least one reason why they're very short, not like a weird opinion that they have, from the definition of the idea of what we're looking at, what we're in search of when we're in search of knowledge, right? Is that we're in search of something that stays, that is what it is, or that stays what it is, which is the same thing. Anything that's not itself, or sometimes not itself, or changes, well, those things are very nice, but tomorrow won't be. And where's the knowledge going to go? So you can't have knowledge of it. You could have something. That's why Plato comes up with this thing. We could have something which is in between knowledge. Is it ignorance? Like, which is what the radical, like, Parmenides people would say. It's just ignorance. You don't know nothing. No, maybe you don't know nothing. Plato is somewhere in between these things. And he says, well, it's something like, there's like a mitzvah. There's something in between knowing and not knowing, and that's opinions. Because just like there's something in between things that exist and things that don't exist, things that exist are the eternal things that don't change. Another way of saying they don't change is that they are what they are. They don't change. They don't forget what they themselves are. They don't. There's nothing not them mixed into them. Another way of saying it. And those things are eternal things. So we call them eternal things, beyond time things. And there are other things that just don't exist, or that never existed, or that can't exist. And those things you obviously can't know, because something that doesn't exist, how could you know it? So what happens to the rest of the world? The rest of the world is somewhere in between. There are things that sometimes exist. Oh, they call them coming to be and pass away. They start and end. And therefore you could have some kind of knowledge of them, which is we call opinion. And it has all kind of metaphors for this, for explaining this and so on. Or shadows of them, whatever they're. Okay, now according to this, and this is not some kind of like trivial, stupid theory that he had, and he even has like this weird theory of like, maybe because they had so many things happening to them, there were so many changes politically, so they were looking for some stability, because people psychologically like stability. What kind of nonsense like what? Okay, this is all dumb. Nobody knows. What does it even mean for a life to be stable? It all depends on what stories you tell yourself. This is very dumb. Like I wrote even a post against Russell's explanation of Plotinus in this way. Like he was living in this hard time, so therefore he became this mystically inclined philosopher, was just looking at the heavens all the time. Well, I don't even know what this means. Are you living in a hard time? Is the 21st century a stable one or a not stable one? I don't know. How do you even answer such a question? It literally depends which street you're living on. It depends on your like temperament. It depends on so many stuff, and it's not even a reasonable question to ask. And everyone thinks that the 20th century was a messed up century, and I know nobody became bigger Kabbalists because of this. Quite the opposite. So it doesn't seem to be true. If this like theory of people in unstable times becoming Platonic philosophers is true, it would predict that the 20th century would be the most Platonic century in Europe ever. And turns out to be just the opposite, right? So all these like smart continental and English actually, all these like all of European thinkers decided that the world wars were proof that metaphysics doesn't exist, which is quite the opposite than this theory. You know, honest. How does this work? So it's not a good thing. Anyways, so that's not the reason. I don't know what is the reason, but this kind of star system doesn't make sense. Anyways, but this is the point. So this is a very important point, like the most important point, and like the most important thing that we have to get. I don't think I'm explaining it correctly. I'm just mentioning it. That the ancient Greek philosophers all thought that stability or unchange or again, let's say a better word, a thing that sounds better, right? When you say unchanged, modern people think that sounds bad. It's like how do you call it? Like stock. It's like unflexible. We have like all these associations with these words that are bad. So how about I say remains itself? Now it starts to sound more modern. Like you're never something not that you are. Right? Suddenly that's that's authenticity, right? Suddenly it sounds like a good thing. Right? But these are all the same thing. Has nothing of something else mixed into it. It's entirely what it is. It's very purely what it is. And now to be clear, this means that, and I'm trying to explain this because I feel like all these people that are talking about history like totally don't get it. This means that history, in the sense, now history can be said, and we could talk about the history of animals also, not only like natural history, right? And if history means change, and this is important, history is another word for change. Well, generally when we talk about history, we mean a change in human culture, a change in human values, change in human success, and so on. But the word history, as opposed to the word science, is basically change versus not change, right? And so in other words, does God, you'll remember that the medieval people all were very excited by God being an unchanging thing, right? Unmoved, right? Another word that you could play with to make sound better or worse for modern people, depending on how you say it. Unmoved mover. Right, and they were very excited about it. And actually, one of like explicit criticisms by certain modern people of this is that you want God to be very moved, or would it be so unmoved? Oh, but there's other people. He's not the only one. But that's a question of your metaphysics. It's not a question about God. It's a question of what are you even talking about? Is knowledge should be not? Does God have a history? Do things that have a history, and are they better than things that don't have a history? That always are just what they are? That never became something else, that didn't become what they are, they just were that. What is the good? What is better? What does it even mean to be from better, to want to be better than the other? And of course this means something for human ethics too. Like is human ethics always, I was thinking about this. We remember one of the things that Aristotle said about when he was criticizing historians or the wrong kind of poets, is that they write biographies, right? And it seems like a biography is the classic modern way of organizing humanity.
I heard part about this book. It's the back panel.
All right.
It's a book about the idea of history, and it says, for years before his death in 1943, R.G. Collingwood was both a professor of philosophy at Oxford and a practicing.
Gives the history of the author. Yeah, okay, that's because you want. Yeah, it's true. I said this last week. Like, we're so historicist that every book you read, the first chapter is where was the guy, when was he born, and so on. Like, why is that the first chapter? Maybe the first chapter should be like, did you ever think of how the stars move in the sky or whatever? Like, maybe that's the introduction. Anyways, what I was saying is that Aristotle says that biographies are bad poetry, right? And some people did like biographies, like, all the stories of some Greek hero, and he said this is wrong because it has no unity. Because a biography is just a series of stories one after the other, but they don't constitute one action. And a plot has to be one action.
It's like how the books are organized.
By author?
Yeah.
Alphabetical order. Alphabetical order is the whole other story. Anyways.
No, instead of by idea.
Yeah. Well, Right. So, and I was thinking about this more, and I think there's also connects to our discussion. I'm rambling here a little bit. It also connects to our discussion on Hanukkah by the thing about action. So we tend to think that your action is explained by your biography. And he would say, for example, Collingwood, that this is a Greek way of thinking because it's like substantialist. There is a person, but that's not clear. Like, there might be substances, but that doesn't mean that your life is a substance. People always confuse this, because what we're trying to get is something stable. That doesn't mean that everything is stable, or it doesn't mean that you even have the stability in the correct way. Maybe you're totally confused, and that's why you're against, people nowadays are against essentialism. Maybe that's just because the essentialisms that were taught are totally wrong. Maybe it's like questions if knowledge must be some kind of essentialist thing or not. There's nothing to do with the specific ways in which it was done. Might be better or worse. So anyways, what I was saying is that what did I want to say about a biography? Right, so there's a question about human ethics, right? And the question is something like, and this is important to notice, so people would say that in the ancient way, and there's like language about this in Rambam and other places, what the best kind of person is a big action, never changes his mind, never grows up, is always what it is, right? I just said that the good, the God, the ultimate good is always what it is, never changes. So like never change. You should never get better. You should never like have any progress in your life. You shouldn't steig. Steiging is a modern thing. You should just be what you are. Is that what really the result of the prioritizing unchange? I think that's very dumb and wrong. Firstly, because it's not true. Okay.
You're putting the wrong value in it.
That's one. And also, but what is it? What is it that they would say? That they would say that there is an ideal human, and actually Aristotle wouldn't even say that. They would say there's an ideal human action. And your actions have to, like Plato would say, they have to model, they have to aspire to being that ideal human, which is not a human, or maybe it's a human if you're Aristotelian, but it's not you. It's of course we're a changing thing. You have to become actualized from your potential, and it's changing towards something stable, right? And therefore, until you're a full human being, until you're complete, until you're actualized, your intellect or whatever, you're not a really human. So you're not what you are. The problem is that you should be what you still have this same thing. You should be what you are, but you're not always what you are, right? And also, that's why the story, and that the important thing would be something like this: an interesting story about a person, right? And story in the poetic sense, something that we at least exemplifies something about humanity or teaches us something or something like that, is not a story of how a person came to be what he is. See, this is actually interesting, because he doesn't think. In other words, this is the difference between, and Herodotus explicitly does do this, is when I'm telling you a story about the Trojan War, am I trying to tell you this is a very big difference? Am I trying to tell you how did the Trojan War happen? Why did it happen? Which is what all modern histories and all histories, Herodotus does this. Like, why are the Greeks fighting the Persians so low? Because they're Greeks, or whatever. It goes on forever. And by the way, I never answers the question, because you'll realize that there's like an infinite chain. You have to go back to the mission all the way to where the different people started, and maybe that will explain something. But what Aristotle claims Homer does is not that. He doesn't give you the reason, or if it actually he doesn't at all, because he starts literally in the middle. But he doesn't not here to explain why there's a Trojan War or why the heroes of it came to be what they are. It's not a story about things coming to be. It is a story about changing things. It's a story about actions. And he says that the unit of a drama, of a tragedy, has to be an action, one action. And an action has a kind of a form. It has a beginning, it has an end, it has what it was, it has what it became, it has the moment of change and things like that, but it's a complete action. There's like almost an ideal form. He says almost, because it's not really, but it's almost an ideal form of a complete human action. And I was thinking that this is a very different way of conceptualizing human life, and maybe a more true way. Because we're always we always want to know, how did you write, like we were discussing in Hanukkah. When I see someone doing some heroic deed, I want to know, what did you do to get there, right? How did you change from a baby? Of course, you were born a baby. How did you become the person that does this? And there might be an answer to this, But it's not clear that that's the best conceptualization of this. Maybe the better conceptualization is there is an ideal action, there's a correct action to take in every case, like being a very big hero or doing something in the right way. And there are people that do it. Well, why do they do it? I don't know, that's an interesting question, but I'm not sure that that's a teachable thing. I'm not sure that that's something we can talk about, because that's just a whole series of changes. And there's another thing he would say is that there's so many details and each one is different that you can't even generalize. And there's nothing to learn. In other words, there's no stability, right? Of course, there's a lot of levels of stability. As soon as there's a tiny bit of stability or regularity, we can teach it already. So it has some part of knowledge, right? Knowledge is one test for knowledge is if I can teach it, right? I can teach you in the sense of I can put for you an example of an ideal human action. Do this. Well, how should I do it? I can't tell you that. Of course, there's education, there's training, there's all kind of things. But education will consist just of a smaller and smaller series of specific actions. There isn't really a progress, or there is a progress, but the progress isn't interesting. It's not really explainable. It seems to me maybe he would think something like, there isn't really an answer for the question, how did a person become great? If you can answer that question, I can just give you a bunch of little stories, unconnected stories, like very different from a modern biography. Obviously, the Torah is not a modern, never does biography either. Anytime it has, it's like heroes, and there are always lists of stories, right? And it seems like so important to notice, right? That, and again, you could see the silly version of this in articles, biographies, which are neither biographies nor descriptions of ideal actions, but they're lists of anecdotes instead of biographies, right? Or any pre-modern biography, or they call them hagiographies. We invented a word to make fun of them, but they're trying to do something which is not the same thing as what modern biographies are trying to do. And we live as young modern people, and we say, like, what do you mean? What's the point of you giving me an ideal action? I want to know how to do it. And we pretend, or we think, that by reading like this kind of biography, which has all the guy's difficulties and all of his problems, and supposed to show some kind of progress of. And the sad thing with biographies is that if they end, they don't do that, right? Because then it always ends with the guy in Pampers and the nursing home. No biographies really get that far. So what's the progress exactly? Human life is something that arises and passes away. Thank you very much, right? The human life as the biography, the full biography, always starts and ends in Pampers. That's not a beautiful story, a lot of three-part, like a part, act 3, dead. So, of course, if you're at art school, you have a solution for this, because there were a lot of people by Slavaya. All right, thank you very much.
I would say they think they're doing what ideal action is.
To be a Adam Gano.
They're explaining what that ideal is.
What, to have a lot big Levi?
There is no. I'm saying that there really is no journey there. They just explain the ideal. This guy somehow, that's what's crazy about it. That first, this guy is the ideal, and just everything he does was just explaining that.
I understand. We see.
It's like a platonic man.
I understand. And why do we always criticize it? Because they're not really ideal. Because that's not historically true. But who cares about that? You see, you should be defending it now. Because we're not interested in truth. We're not interested in what happened. We're interested in what should happen. Oh, is it what should happen? That's another question. But you see, if you forget about the full human life, the biography, and you see actions, I think that actions can be perfect. Or at least close to perfect, right? I can do something. I think it's being a tzaddik is a waste of time. To do tzidkis things is a worthy thing. A tzaddik is just the guy that happened to have done many of them, or even one. By the way, if you read Tanakh, if you read the Medrash stories, they don't really keep. They have this it's a trope even in Medrash. Like you could do one good thing in your life and go to Gan Eden for this, right? It's enough. And maybe this is just because they don't think that the thing that gives unity to a human being is his physical life, is this lifetime, like this cycle where you start and end in diapers. And it's really sad if you think that that's a physical life. I really don't. Like you steigen until you die and you're senile, or you have to die, you should die before that. I was reading, and all of Ben Gurion's biographies have this very sad thing where he build up till these great actions, and then had this 30 years of ranting weirdly on the radio against the current prime minister or whatever he did. He did things like that. Whatever. And And they're like, well, it's sad that he should have died earlier and we would have had a nicer book to write. But maybe the answer to this is that it's not interesting. The thing we're trying to exemplify, the thing we're trying to teach is not this guy was the perfect guy in his life. This guy was the perfect guy in that he did this action in a certain period of his life, like the years that he was that he was working. And those are the great actions, and this is that's why we're writing a book about him, right? Because he founded a state of Israel, and therefore it exists. And nobody cares about the old man that was ranting at whatever, planning to make the desert into an oasis or whatever he was planning. I mean, those are nice dreams, but that's not. Yes, many great. Paul. He wrote nicer books when he was old, but yeah, but he was more successful. He was more successful in not being a wartime leader than Ben-Gurion, but yeah, somewhat similar. So, but if you think about it in this way, and like think about, I was turning about this for 2 weeks. I was thinking, like, Aristotle says biographies are bad form. Don't write them. They're not interesting. And I'm like thinking, isn't that the most or is assume the opposite? That's like the most basic unity that humans have. Like just this disconnected anecdote. That's what you want. But think about your life. Is your life really a biography? Do you have a biography? Well, physically I do, because I got the same social security number, and it seems like there's like some continuity. But in the kind of actions that I'm doing, is there? And like you have this like trope, like everything prepares you for that. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I don't know. But that seems to be much less useful than we pretend it is in the like modern way of writing a biography.
This is the most extreme version. You're saying you're not even affected yourself by your own history, let alone the opposite.
Yeah, does my history explain me? Well, there's some things that I tell you that if you know some facts about history, you'll understand them better. But is that like really the point? I don't know. I'm thinking that a better value, and this is like, again, the stability is the action. Like the unit of one thing, one ideal thing is one action. Like the whole world is just one action that God did. It's not what God is. You see, we always want to know. That makes the same difference, right? You want to know God, are you going to like, what kind of thing is he? What kind of person is he? What kind of internal life does he have? Did he grow up? Did he grow down? Does he steig? Does he fall? Does he have like aliyas and yeridus? I don't know. That's the kind of things that modern people want to know. But that's not clear that that's the kind of thing you should want to know. Maybe what you should want to know is like, did he do one great thing ever? Or like, is there a great thing that he did? A more clear way of saying it. Or a good thing, an exemplary thing that we could learn from, that we can emulate. Maybe that's enough. And maybe we should try to train our life. All this became a mishmash. But I really thinking about it. Maybe we should try to train our life by like thinking of certain ideal actions and trying to do them, rather than thinking of what person I am, or like the whole Tanya, which is worried about this like thing. Well, people didn't read Tanya. Read it. Which is like worried about this like problem. It's very modern. That's why I was telling someone this like Tanya is the most modern book, because it's all about this problem. Like I've had this moment of Dvarkas, I loved God, and then I ate a pizza and I seem to love the pizza, and I'm not sure, do I love God, do I love pizza? And there's thousands of ways to answer this, and there, you're really two people, so one of them loves God and one of them loves the pizza, and that's the Tanya's classic way of answering it. Or you could like say, well, the pizza's just God too, so therefore. But what about, why is this a question? Like, who told you that this is a problem? If there's an action, like we're always thinking of like the actions as revealing what you really are, something like that. This like very modern way. There's a self and like what I might biography, and now like, was this person a good person or a bad person? Well, the beginning was this, and then it changed. Which the
whole question. But why is God in like how? Why this? Because then he did it. That's what your head's answering.
Something like that. Other than there's discussions about this, but yeah. Like other than thinking of it, like, is it testing you? He knows already. No, there's no you to know. There's no you to know. There's action. If the action one, the shiny way of saying it, like there's an action. He did this great action, and that's what's interesting about, not about him, about the action. He's the person that did it, the agent that did it, the subject of it, which is part of the story. Every story needs a person, but it's not. The stories are not about like some person that's. And again, the reason why I'm saying this is not because I'm, in some sense, I'm not sure if I'm denying a stable self. It seems like a weird thing to do. For me, it's more that I think that a life, I'm denying the stability of a human life. Yeah, I'm just, from looking around at people, I don't find it, or at least, and also I don't find it useful to like plan your life that way, because of the problems that we discussed at the Hanukkah party. That it seems there seems to be no way to predict who is going to do great actions in the real ones. Like, in other words, the whole point of an historian, like you said, an historian means we can't predict what you're gonna do, right? Even God can't predict the story. We don't know. So it's just doing. So how do I talk about this? How do we, like, what should I do? Well, that's what you should do things. That's the answer. Well, of course, it can be you that's doing those things. But maybe actions go to Gan Eden, not people. Maybe in heaven there's only actions, there's no people. What does that even mean? What do you think? I mean, because I'll have this thing, like, what if you do some affairs and some mitzvahs and you have to divide it according to time, but time doesn't exist in eternity. Doesn't make any sense. I'm sorry.
Far. It's a far reach, even though it's true about our own lives. I think like everyone contextualizes themselves, and I think there's like a sense of shame when people identify too far back in continuity with their own history. There is a dissonance of like saying I'm the same person as I was when I was 5 and kicking on the floor.
Uh-huh.
You don't want to see the same person. You don't want to see well, I'm that. I mean, it's a basic problem.
But that's, yes, but because there's different ways of solving the problem of change. Here, like more else.
I wonder how many traditional solutions work the same way. I'm assuming some of them do, and some need challenges. But I don't know. I don't know if that there's no stability, but there is some. I mean, right? All change involves some stability and some change.
According to, yeah.
So that's true about human life too. It's in some ways the same as it was, and it's in some ways different. But it is strange. Like most people, like I'd say, not to get too into like I guess like identity metaphysics, but most people don't. Most people identify better with who they were yesterday and less with both who they were 5 years ago and who they will be in 50 years. So it does seem to be a gradient line.
But what if we make what I'm trying to do? What if we make actions the primary thing? How did I get to this whole thing? In other words, what if it's the thing with human is weird. What if things that I do are more primary than things that I am? Well, things that I do, you could always say things that I do are just me somehow turning into that thing or turning into the person that does that thing, which is a kind of change from potential to actual or whatever. But maybe in other words, what do we understand? Right? Again, we're thinking of the man serves the action. Yeah. Not the other way around. The man, and in terms of knowledge, right? In terms of knowledge, because I'm trying to think what to understand. Like, take the historical example, right? I want to understand the Chazon Ish, okay? How do I understand them? What do I do in order to understand them? What do I study? Right? That's really the question that we're thinking. What do I study? There's a historical way of doing it, which is read his biography. And his biography is going to be written in a certain formula, like he was, and how did he become what he was, which is always what we're going to try to answer. What were the forces acting on him? What were the choices he made? Things like that. And the traditional way is just going to be listing a bunch of great deeds he did, in which each of them, some of them, have the same theme. So, and there's, of course, what he is part of the theme, right? There's such a kind of person called the Chazon Ish, which is why we probably care about him.
Right. Is it like back when they were popular, Reader's Digest used to have a column of extraordinary actions.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just a catalog of people that...
By normal people. Like, not extraordinary people.
Right. But to me, there's also something absent from that, too, in the sense that you don't figure out how the actions inform the person after either.
Maybe they don't. That's what I'm trying to say. Who cares? Maybe... I don't know. I'm just trying to,
if you
play this.
You want to find out about Chazon Ish. Why do you want to find out about
Yeah,
Chazon
but
Ish?
what exactly? What does it mean? I'm trying to find out. Am I trying to find it about a certain guy who was born at a certain time and lived to a certain age?
No, I'm not saying either way. I'm saying that you want to know about Chazon Ish. Do you want to know about life saving? Or what is the subject matter that you're trying to find out in the first
I think the subject is, I think that's the question, but it's at least something that I want to know. Or in terms of, moral exemplar or something like that, it's something that I want to be able to emulate, right?
Okay. That's a little bit different than looking at a raw action. If you're looking to, let's say, save a life, right? Let's say you consider that an extraordinary action, right?
Yeah, it's not, by the way. Okay.
Maybe not. I'm not saying it is or isn't.
Whatever, no, it depends on how you do it.
Maybe, okay, but let's see how you do it, right? I mean, even how you do it how you do it. You're not talking about whether or not you did CPR or used
No, I meant with what kind of
what kind of person.
Yeah, with what kind of person?
Right.
Yeah.
So, but then you're also asking about not only you want to also figure out what kind of person might do such an act, not what kind of person in the sense of whether or not he wore Pampers or Huggies, but what kind of person in the sense of what this.
In the sense of what kind of agent? No, in the sense of what kind of agent is the agent of this action.
Right. Okay. That's a good.
That's so it's still subservient to the action. In other words, what's the kind of thing, or maybe it needs yesterday for it, maybe not. We can discuss it. But what is the kind of thing that does these kind of things? Right. Like, in other words, in the sense of like something, I'll tell you, like the sense would be something like this. Like, let's say I'm trying to understand the solar system, right? And let's say I'm some kind of Platonist where the solar system has to have some kind of drive or some kind of soul or some kind of thought in order to be what it is, right? Well, what is it up? And this is a very, very important point, because we read these kind of theories and we always confuse them with the modern kind of person that we think of, modern kind of agents. Modern kind of agents are always outside of their actions. They always have a history. The solar system, if there's an agent there, right? This is a metaphysical question. Definitely doesn't have a history. Doesn't have an inner life. It's not anything else besides for that which turns the spheres, whatever, right? In other words, but there is something. Comes some kind of person, some kind of mind, some kind of soul, whatever you want to call it, some kind of actor, right? There's an agent there, in the sense of that which does this action, and it needs that. You can't. The understanding of the action is not complete without having an agent, for whichever reasons or whatever the arguments are for there needing an agent.
Deny the history of any, to assert that the history of anything is what it is also to deny agency, right? Because there is no place across time where an agent suddenly pops up.
Understand, but, well, depends what kind of agent. No, depends what kind. Meaning the human ones, actually, I don't know. Because, again, only if you think that what it is to be the person that did this action means to be the one that started in diapers. Maybe that's only like but maybe it's not. Maybe a person changes too much for that. Maybe that's not actually useful. One of the conceits of we'll get to this in our order at some point. One of the conceits of the modern defense of history is that we are history, right? We still are our past, and our past even in the sense of like all the way back to whichever period that historian is working on, right? And
People like to this back.
People like to have a story of like spontaneous self-consciousness, right? Yeah.
I don't know if spontaneous is a word either. I'm trying to think what it is. It's something like,
right. The same people that say that suddenly man became conscious of his own history are the same people that say man suddenly became conscious overall. Not that I don't have a problem.
Okay, but does the person need a history? Forget about in whichever sense to explain his actions. That's the argument that all kind of historians have, but we don't have to have that argument. Maybe it's just like you're saying there needs to be an agent. I understand there needs to be an agent. In other words, like Aristotle says, one of the ingredients of a plot is that there's a guy that does it. Yes, thank you very much. And the guy has to be fleshed out in order to, if you're writing a comedy or you're writing a tragedy, you need to give him a costume, you need to give him a name, just because, it's hard to pick. Because we need to show that there's a person, that there's an agent there. There's a doer. But the doer is only right? Does para exist outside of this story? The one that we read in Parshas Bay. I wanted to give a class, Alamante Saper. Yeah. Is there such a para? I mean, of course, historically there was, right? But if you read the story, you wouldn't know of him, right? It's not part of. There's a character, like one of the characters, or maybe the main character, or one of the main characters of the Exodus story is Pare and Moshe. But Moshe does have to come with some kind of history, which is okay. So the diapers part exists. But take Pare, would we have like a fuller understanding of Pare if we would have known what kind of boy he was when he was growing up? Well, for sure not.
Would say he's the king of Nineveh later. Whatever.
Well, that person thinks that it is interesting.
No, I think the opposite. That person thinks whatever, it's the same guy. It's for all to the purposes. Okay, they different things.
I see what you mean. Like there's ways of splitting up, and sometimes is there ever that opposite? Like all the medrash that connects people. Is there any medrash that divides people in the way that I'm trying to do? Like today Pare Have. I don't know. Well, V'yakam al Chadash. And they're always putting the same. Wait. I'm asking you. There must be somewhere where they're taking one person that's obviously the same person and dividing him because of it being very different actions. I think that there must be such a thing to remember.
This was the Hanukkah shit, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is
Right. But now we're getting into something much more detailed and much more specific, which is the question of, like, does the understanding of a human person mean the understanding of how he came to be what he is? Or is it the understanding of what he is? And then you'll ask me, this is the summary of my whole class now. And then you'll ask me, what do you mean what he is? Of course, he wasn't always what he is. And now I'm not talking about him. I'm talking about a specific action of which he is the agent. Well, this action could be his whole life. If there's someone that his action is like, he has studied the Torah for 70 years, maybe that's one big action. I'm not saying an action has to be like a moment. It can be very long. But that's some kind of unity. Or we say, Moshe, who Moshe v'Aaron? Oh, we just told you who they were. They're the appearance of the sons of whatever. No, that's not who they were. Asher Ha'itzi. The people that went to take out the Eden of Hashem. That's all they are. Well, they did other things, so they're also that. Maybe it's the same one. Maybe it's a different one. Maybe that's how they lived so long in those days, because they're really a bunch of people. There's actually such a theory.
maybe. I had to try to construct such theory vibrations.
Yeah, no, but
It's basically a kingdom, but it was a very reason.
right. So wait, the point is that's like my basic thing. Maybe, and this relative to her, I am thinking that maybe it's a useful way to think of ourselves and our own actions, and at least we'll save the whole like confusion of like what kind of person am I really? Well, we are not. There's no such a thing. And I don't like the Buddhist way. There's no self. Just in the like way there is a self, but it changes too much to be able to be understood. Right? Again, you see that it's very obvious to like the Platonic insight where it's hard. We can't understand anything that changes too much. It makes total sense. It's not weird. Could you understand yourself? Only if you have a certain stability. Right? Could you know yourself? That's why the self-knowledge is useful, because that's like model for knowledge, rather than like knowing lists of facts, which what they try to convince you in school knowledge means. Do I know myself? Well, to the extent that I have some kind of stability, to the extent that I am the same thing that I was 5 minutes ago, or that if I'm very different, people will say, oh, I don't know myself. Or someone that's totally schizophrenic and bipolar, well, they don't know themselves. Obviously not. Maybe the main thing they're missing isn't, it's not possible to know it because it's not stable enough, right? You could know some kind of process. You could say, I know myself as a story. I wonder if that would work.
I think it was.
Do you know yourself? Do the people that write memoirs know themselves better than the people that don't?
I think there used to be types.
That's what all started. And then there's also the question: did they write it until they pass, and did they start it at the moment they were born?
Well, you should start it at the moment your great first human was born. Right?
I think there used to be a type around that person that just did, but don't really know themselves. They actually only do.
Even like me.
No, because you're discussing it. Who wouldn't even know what you mean? But it's like, what are you like? What? I don't know.
I understand what it means when the Tanya asks this question. Like, what am I? I'm trying to get out of it. I'm trying to say that over it.
People don't even like understand. I was reading some guys.
You know such people, or
Let's say there used to be such people. Let's say the therapy people changed.
therapy changed it?
Basically, these people just. This is it's like my grandma didn't ask this. You don't even know you met. He didn't have a self-awareness.
I don't know if that's correct.
What was self-awareness? What he did. That would be.
But if he would maybe he wasn't. There's a very big difference between articulation and knowing, right? I could think of people that don't know themselves. I mean, most people don't know themselves. But if that person if one day, like he comes every day to a certain minyan, and one day it changed, the minyan changed colors or whatever, they're having a different nusach, he would be confused. In other words, he wouldn't know himself. So his knowledge of himself is his stability, his regularity. I'm the guy. He wouldn't say it this way. If you ask him, he would get confused because he didn't go to therapy. But he still lives that way. There's like an implicit, whatever you want to call it. There's some kind of implicit knowledge or subconscious, whatever. I don't know what these words mean, but some kind of self-knowledge. Whereas like, what am I? I am the thing, and the guy that wakes up every day and goes to work and whatever. I mean, you see people, right? Those actually, especially those kind of people, like we've retired and now he's not sure what he is anymore. Because he's the guy that goes to open the store in the morning, and now he's not that guy. So what is he? Right?
It's interesting because I think our biographies of the years, let's say 5 through 8 in our lives, look different when we write them as
as 25-year-olds than as 30-year-olds than we were at the time.
So
Like my I guess challenge always with memoirs, I don't know if this is the same problem or and a variation of it, is that this is your 40-year-old memoir. Is there a 43-year-old memoir that you would write that would include all different stories and not only that, but understand them in with different significance?
right. So we tried to give it. I mean, a memoir really. That you see, that's why when I said that he's against biography, there's a problem here, right? Because he's against a specific type of biography. He's really against the Aristotle biography because he says that's not a biography. That's a whole bunch of separate things. Just publish it as separate stories. That's not one story. Right. And then if someone the people that write good biographies actually do try, you see, that's what I'm trying to get at. This is a mushroom for everything. They do try to at least a consistent progression, right? Which is one story, instead one action. That's why you say, like, when someone writes, you know how, when I was a baby, I already thought that I'll become this, and it prefigures it, or it's like the challenge to it, it somehow connects to what I am now. And in that sense, it's not a biography. It's not a biography in the sense that Aristotle is criticizing it, but I'm thinking maybe he would criticize it because he would say that's the wrong way to constitute one human understanding of of yourself. Maybe it's a possible way. In other words, right? So let's go back to a different angle here. A lot of people say, of course, Aristotle criticizes biographies. Let's say, but that's because he's thinking of biographies that have no coherence, like Aristotle biographies. But if you would read like a modern biography, he would agree, because that's a biography that has a coherence. It's really one story. Even if it has decline and then, that's still legitimate part of a story. It's one story, right? But then you could say maybe it's not a true story, but that's not our problem right here. But then I would say that's one story, but it's a story of the kind of story it's trying to be is trying to make something that changes too much into a unstable thing. Which, maybe if someone was very boring and their whole life he only did two things, maybe it would work. But for people that do more than two things in their life, more than three things, I think that's the number, doesn't work. Because it's going to be a confused story. And you might be pretending, because you can't actually know yourself as all of that. Or in other words, maybe the other way of saying it would be like the subject here shouldn't be the person you were. It should be the kind of person you were. And maybe there are some things that don't belong to that. You see, that would be another thing. And of course, everyone understands this, right? Even the most honest memoirs cut some things out. And not only because they're lying, because they think it's not relevant to the story, right? I'm trying to give you a story. Yeah, well, it makes sense. Because this is not relevant to the story I'm trying to tell. And a story in the sense of a action, some kind of thing, one thing that I did. And the I is part of the story, but not everything of the I is part of the story. All the unrelevant things of the I are not even, we're not trying to understand that I, we're trying to understand the thing that I did. Yeah. And why not? Because, well, if you're giving medical history, you would have to discuss those things. But since I'm giving a history of something I did, all of those details are not really what I'm trying to do. I lost my thread from the beginning of the thing where I started to talk about the history of history. Anyways, I'm gonna try to summarize what I'm doing today. What I'm doing today is we discussed the fact that history has a history, and that's not important because we could cynically redo the same argument they did to everyone else to them, although it's true. Because that's not interesting. It's interesting in the collapse it into the present way, where there's arguments and there's ways that needs to be justified, right? And then we started to try to get at, this is the rest of the class. We started to try to get at the first thing, and we said there's a bunch of things. There's a Greek, ancient Greek criticism of history. There's a Cartesian criticism of history. There's a religious medieval criticism of history. There's others, but we started with the first one, which is maybe the most important one, which is this Plato. We could just call it Plato's criticism of history. Aristotle was a student. And there's other philosophies and there's other Greek thinkers that don't think this way at all. So it's not very weird to say Greek. But Plato's criticism, which is that knowledge needs to be of a stable thing. And we ended up by exemplifying this by something very simple that people can't know themselves if they change too much. And the one way we tried to explicate this was by discussing if the best way to organize a person was by his life, like by biography, or by his like actions, or one action, or a bunch of actions, or his whole life is one action. That's a different question. And then have the person be the person that did those actions instead of the story being like about how he changed into the person that does that actions. Because maybe that's already too much change and that doesn't actually explain us anything. And the nafkamina is if we really learn something more by the kind of modern biographies that want to talk about someone's weaknesses. In other words, why they want to talk about their weaknesses? Well, also because they like gossip like everyone else, but also because they want, like, instead of telling you like the exemplary action, not the person, right? Because person is wrong. If you confuse this like a Haredi, you say it's an exemplary person, there's no such thing as person. But if you do like the exemplary action, you say, but how do you do that? And you say, okay, so I'm going to tell you, instead of telling the story of the action, I'm going to tell you the story of how it became the person that does that action. And it's not clear that that's a story with enough coherence or enough, we could say even predictive power. It's not clear that we actually learn things from that. Maybe we learn things only from, of course, it's too simplistic what I'm saying, but that's the basic, that's the summary of my class, I think. Well,
There's also like a push-pull question, right? Like, are you pushed into the action from your history, or are you pulled to it from its future, right?
meaning like if there's an ideal, like a catalyst, right? The end. There's an end, or end like a complete action. Right, but the question is, what are we giving stories? Are they going to give this the full story, like of how he got to be that perfect thing? Or is it going to be some kind of example of the perfect thing, which by itself, you see, which by itself will pull you toward?
Right. But I'm saying is, but that's exactly the point. Is people tend to describe where the thing came from instead of what the thing was trying to become.
Yes, exactly.
I actually saw a good conversation where someone's talking to someone else, and he says that, like, you know, people are constantly trying to conceptualize a God beyond time, right? And they somehow always put him before time, which is, you know, just to feed into the fallacy, right?
Right, another piece of time, right?
The way to kind of, I guess, almost imagine yourself out of it or break out of this is, can you equally imagine a God at the end of time that pulls reality into existence? And if you can imagine both of these things, then you can, well, then if you can understand how both of these ideas,
they're both wrong.
according to that,
or
they both be coherent, then you have to now approach a God outside.
I understand.
Of that entire system of push-pull.
Right, like it seems like the complete thing or the like stable thing that we're after is still an action, so it's not like as stable as, you know, a God or something like that, but it's a thing, right? You could say like something like this is the description of like ideal of an ideal action, and yeah, and of course there's a change towards that, right? But that the understanding, I mean, like we understand any form, right? We say the form is basically what it wants to be, not what it is. What it tends towards being, wants is a word, and that's a stable thing, and it also stops there, right? That's why it stops. It doesn't. The form is like the limit of it, like it doesn't go further. You can't strike forever. If you could strike forever, that would be useless. Whatever. Modern people think you could strike forever, so I don't know. Okay, that's enough. How do I stop that? I forgot which one I have to stop. This one also.